The welfare state has done to black Americans what slavery could not have done, Jim Crow and the harshest racism could not have done, namely to destroy the black family. Many people believe that the route to economic power is to have political power. And there's absolutely no evidence to support that.
Government cannot create a special privilege for one American without simultaneously creating a special disadvantage for some other American.
I first encountered him when I was an undergraduate economics major. I was watching TV. I think it was Phil Donahue show. I never heard of him, but I could tell we were of like mind, and I was just really impressed with his demeanor, with his smarts, with his quickness, with his intelligence.
I first met Walter Williams in the summer of 1969 when I was teaching summer school at UCLA. And just one day, some tall guy walks into the room and says, "I've heard that you have ideas like mine."
When I was asked to interview here at George Mason, one of the first things that occurred to me is that, wow, if I get this job, I'll be a colleague of Walter Williams.
He never took a class from me. He came to me precisely because he had already independently arrived at the very same kinds of conclusions that I arrived at.
Walter grew up playing basketball with Will Chamberlain, just on the streets. And Walter wanted to go into the NBA, but he figured, what are the chances of him succeeding in the NBA given that he's only the second best basketball player in his small Philadelphia neighborhood? Well, the best one was Will Chamberlain.
Walter is not a go along to get along kind of guy. And that's a very large part of his being willing to say things that I'm sure that many other people knew, but were not about to say.
Walter's a radical. The positions he takes in economics are very radical. He's against the minimum wage, he's against all rent control, he's against income redistribution. And Walter takes these positions because he understands, I think correctly, that if the government followed his advice, the lives of people in America would be more prosperous and more free and better, and especially the lives of poor people.
Walter understands that government regulations typically operate to the disadvantage of low-income people in general and low-income minorities in particular.
The first book that I read that Walter had written was called The State Against Blacks. I remember that book impressed me for two reasons. Number one, the clarity of exposition. Walter writes because he wants to be read and understood, and so he's mastered clarity of exposition. The second thing that impressed me about that book was the very effective use of empirical data. He wasn't just throwing numbers out to show that he could throw numbers out.
Walter has to back up his work and his conclusions precisely because they are so unusual. People on the other side don't. They can say anything they want, and if it's what's current in that area, it passes.
It's not typical to hear a black man say what Walter says. His eloquence, the quality of his arguments, the sincerity of his arguments, his knowledge, those are what make Walter Williams great. Those are the things that make Walter Williams effective.
He was the only man I know who had no trouble finding a parking space in downtown Washington because he came in somewhere between 4 and 5 a.m.
Walter will be 81 very soon, and he hasn't slowed down. The guy is amazing.
One of the things that Walter has tried to do is explain the value of freedom not only in and of itself, but also as a means of greater prosperity.
He is a great champion of individual liberty. Above all, that's what Walter is. It has nothing to do with color, it has nothing to do with sex, it has nothing to do with nationality. Walter believes in and cherishes individual liberty for everyone, and he wants to see everyone be as free as possible.
On his website, Walter offers anyone of European descent a proclamation of amnesty and pardon.
I, Walter Williams, do declare full and general amnesty and pardon to all persons of European
ancestry for both their own grievances and those of their forebears against my people.
Therefore, from this day forward, Americans of European ancestry
can stand straight and proud knowing they are without guilt and thus obliged
not to act like damn fools in their relationships with Americans of African ancestry. That's wonderful.
As my dad says in this proclamation of amnesty and pardon, that's over. Pick yourself up, and it's time to do better, and time to want for better.
Walter signs that proclamation on his website, Walter E. Williams, gracious and generous granter.